Our minds are the product of many yesterdays, and the present is merely the passage of the past to the future. Our minds, our activities, our being, are founded on time. Without time we cannot think, because thought is the result of time. Thought is the product of many yesterdays, and there is no thought without memory. Memory is time, for there are two kinds of time, the chronological and the psychological. There is time as yesterday by the watch, and as yesterday by memory. You cannot reject chronological time. It would be absurd. You would miss your train. But is there really any time at all apart from chronological time? Psychological time is the product of the mind. Without the foundation of thought, there is no time, time merely being memory, as yesterday in conjunction with today, which moulds tomorrow. When you have ecstasy, a creative joy, a series of bright clouds surrounded by dark clouds, in that moment there is no time, there is only the immediate present. The mind, coming in after that, the experience in the present, remembers and wishes to continue it, gathering more and more of itself, thereby creating time. Time is considered as a means of evolving something greater, of becoming something. The problem is this: one is violent, greedy, envious, angry, vicious or passionate. What we are dissatisfies us. It creates conflict, disturbance, and, disliking that state, we want something better, something nobler, more idealistic. Therefore, we desire transformation because there is pain, discomfort, conflict. If you say it will be overcome by time, you are still in conflict. You may say it will take 20 days or 20 years to get rid of conflict, to change what you are, but during that time you are still in conflict, and therefore time does not bring about transformation. When we use time as a means of acquiring a quality, a virtue, or a state of being, we are merely postponing or avoiding what is. The very resistance to conflict is itself a form of conflict, in the form of what you call greed, envy, or violence, but your mind is still in conflict. So it is important to see the falseness of the process of depending on time as a means of overcoming. Then you are able to do what you are, a psychological disturbance. If I really want to understand something, there is immediately a quiet state of mind. When you want to understand conflict, you are no longer depending on time at all. You are simply confronted with what is, which is conflict. Then, immediately there comes a quietness, a stillness of mind. When you no longer depend on time as a means of transforming what is, because you see the falseness of that process, then you are confronted with what is. And as you are interested to understand what is, naturally you have a quiet mind. In that alert yet passive state of mind, there is understanding. When the mind is no longer resisting, no longer avoiding, no longer discarding or blaming what is, but is simply passively aware, then, in that passivity of the mind, you will find, if you really go into the problem, that there comes a transformation. If you will experiment with what I have been saying, you will find that there is immediate regeneration, a newness, a quality of freshness, because the mind is always still when it is interested, when it desires or has the intention to understand. We are afraid that, if we understand, it might bring about a revolutionary action in our life, and therefore we resist. When the mind is still, tranquil, not seeking any answer or any solution, neither resisting nor avoiding, it is only then that there can be a regeneration. It is truth that liberates, not your effort to be free. If we are to discuss the question of a fundamental change in ourselves, and therefore in the world, and in this change to awaken a certain vision, an enthusiasm, a zeal, a faith, a hope, a certainty which will give us the necessary impetus for action, if we are to understand that, isn't it necessary to go into this question of consciousness? We can see what we mean by consciousness at the superficial level of the mind. Obviously, it is the thinking process, thought. Thought is the result of memory, verbalization. It is the naming, recording, and storing up of certain experiences, so as to be able to communicate. At this level there are also various inhibitions, controls, sanctions, disciplines. With all this we are quite familiar. When we go a little deeper, there are all the accumulations of the race, the hidden motives, the collective and personal ambitions, prejudices, which are the result of perception, contact, and desire. This total consciousness, the hidden as well as the open, is centered around the idea of the me, the self. One must first see the extraordinary subtle activities of the me, of the mind. One must become aware of the ideas, beliefs, speculations, and put them all aside, for they are really deceptions. Others may have experienced reality, but if you have not experienced it, what is the good of speculating about it, or imagining that you are in essence something real, immortal, godly? That is still within the field of thought, and anything that springs from thought is conditioned, is of time, of memory, therefore it is not real. Perhaps in coming to this point, we have used the conscious mind. To go further and experience more deeply requires a mind that is quiet and alert to find out, does it not? It is no longer pursuing ideas, because if you pursue an idea, there is the thinker following what is being said, and so you immediately create duality. Surely it is only when the mind is quiet that it can understand the enormous difficulty, the complex implications of the thinker and the thought as two separate processes, the experiencer and the experienced, the observer and the observed. Revolution, this psychological creative revolution in which the me is not, comes only when the thinker and the thought are one, when there is no duality such as the thinker controlling the thought. And I suggest it is this experience alone that releases the creative energy, which in turn brings about a fundamental revolution, the breaking up of the psychological me. When we realize that disciplines, beliefs, ideals only strengthen the me, and are therefore utterly futile, when we are aware of that from day to day, see the truth of it, do we not come to the central point when the thinker is constantly separating himself from his thoughts, from his observations, from his experiences? So long as the me is the observer, the one who gathers experience, strengthens himself through experience, there can be no radical change, no creative release. When the mind realizes that any speculation, any verbalization, any form of thought only gives strength to the me, when it sees that as long as the thinker exists apart from thought there must be limitation, then the conflict of duality, when the mind realizes that, then it is watchful, everlastingly aware of how it is separating itself from experience, asserting itself, seeking power. In that awareness, if the mind pursues it ever more deeply and extensively, without seeking an end, a goal, there comes a state in which the thinker and the thought are one. In that state there is no effort, there is no becoming, there is no desire to change. In that state the me is not, or there is a transformation which is not of the mind. It is only when the mind is empty that there is a possibility of creation. I am talking of the emptiness which comes through extraordinary thoughtfulness, when the mind sees its own power of creating illusion and goes beyond. Is it possible for the mind to put aside completely all the reasonings, the experiences, the impositions, authorities, so that it is in a state of emptiness? If I may suggest, listen to it, let the question be put to you, let the seed be sown, and it will bear fruit if you really listen to it, if you do not resist it. When the mind sees its own activities, is aware of its own desires, demands, urges, pursuits, the creation of its own authorities, fears, when it sees in itself the resistance created by discipline, by control, and the hope which projects beliefs, ideals, when the mind sees through, is aware of this whole process, can it put aside all these things and be new, creatively empty? You will find whether it can or cannot, only if you experiment without having an opinion about it, without wanting to experience that creative state. If you want to experience it, you will, but what you experience is only a projection of desire. But if you begin to observe, to be aware of your own activities from day to day, from moment to moment, watching the whole process of yourself as in a mirror. Then, as you go deeper and deeper, you will come to the ultimate question of this emptiness, in which alone there can be the new. There is reality only when the mind is completely free from the analyzer, from the experiencer, and the experienced. Then you will find the answer. Then you will see that the change comes without your asking, that the state of creative emptiness is not a thing to be cultivated. It is there. It comes darkly, without any invitation. Only in that state is there a possibility of renewal, newness, revolution. I am suffering because I am lost. I am being called to give my attention to something which I am not willing to look at. Something is being forced upon me which I am reluctant to see and to understand. When sorrow exists, it exists only in relation to something. It cannot exist by itself, even as fear cannot exist by itself, but only in relation to something, to an individual, to an incident, to a feeling. Now you are fully aware of the suffering. If the centre is related to it, then it is afraid of it. Then it must act and do something about it. But if the centre is that, a fundamental transformation has taken place. Then there is no longer I suffer, because there is no centre to suffer, and the centre suffers because we have never examined what the centre is. We just live from word to word, from reaction to reaction. We never say, let me see that that thing is that suffers. You cannot see by enforcement, by discipline. You must look with interest, with spontaneous comprehension. Then you will see that the thing we call suffering, pain, the thing that we avoid, and the discipline have all gone. As long as I have no relationship to the thing as outside me, the problem is not. The moment I establish a relationship with it outside me, the problem is. Then there is full attention, integrated attention, and that which is completely regarded is understood and dissolved, and so there is no fear, and therefore the word sorrow is non-existent. We can find out inwardly, psychologically, why we are in this state of utter boredom. We can see why most of us are in this state. We have gone from sensation to sensation, from excitement to excitement, till we come to a point when we are really exhausted. Now, realizing that, don't proceed any further. Take a rest. Be quiet. Let the mind gather strength by itself. Don't force it. As the soil renews itself during the winter time, so, when the mind is allowed to be quiet, it renews itself. When you come to that point where you are really allowing yourself to be as you are, bored, ugly, hideous, or whatever it is, then there is a possibility of dealing with it. There is a problem only when we do not accept a thing as it is, and wish to transform it, which does not mean that I am advocating contentment. On the contrary, if we accept what we are, then we see that the thing which we dreaded, the thing which we called boredom, the thing which we called despair, the thing which we called fear, has undergone a complete change. There is a complete transformation of the thing of which we were afraid. To say to oneself, I understand something intellectually, is surely a barrier to understanding. It is a partial process, and therefore no understanding at all. The thing that I am objecting to is the disturbance. I give it different names at different times, in different moods. One day I call it this, and another something else. But the desire is basically not to be disturbed. I don't want to be free from pleasure because there is no disturbance, at least not for the time being. But hate, resentment are very disturbing factors in my life, and I want to get rid of them. If I am not disturbed, I shall remain asleep, and perhaps that is what most of us want to do. To be pacified, to be put to sleep, to get away from any disturbance, to find isolation, seclusion, security. If I do not mind being disturbed, really, not just superficially, if I don't mind being disturbed because I want to find out, then my attitude towards hate, towards resentment, undergoes a change, doesn't it? If I do not mind being disturbed, then the name is not important, is it? The word hate is not important, is it? Or resentment against people is not important, is it? Because then I am directly experiencing the state, which I call resentment, without verbalizing that experience. Because we term it, we reduce a new experience or fix it in the terms of the old, whereas if we do not name it, Then there is an experience which is directly understood, and this understanding brings about a transformation in that experiencing. We do not see the importance of being disturbed, of being inwardly insecure, of not being dependent. Surely it is only an insecurity that you discover, that you see, that you understand. Any attempt to find security is a hindrance to understanding. When we want to get rid of something which is disturbing, it is surely a hindrance. If we can experience a feeling directly, without naming it, I think we shall find a great deal in it. Then there is no longer a battle with it, because the experiencer and the thing experienced are one, and that is essential. What brings about the unfoldment of the self so that you begin to understand it is the constant awareness of it, without any condemnation, without any identification. There must be a certain spontaneity. You cannot be constantly analysing it, disciplining it, shaping it. This spontaneity is essential to understanding. If I merely limit, control, condemn, then I put a stop to the movement of thought and feeling. It is in the movement of thought and feeling that I discover. Then it is important to find out how to act about it. If I act according to an idea, according to a standard, according to an ideal, then I force the self into a particular pattern. In that there is no understanding, there is no transcending. If I can watch the self without any condemnation, without any identification, then it is possible to go beyond it. If you are listening to me and trying to follow, with not too great an effort, what I wish to convey, then there is a possibility of our understanding each other. But if you are all the time criticizing, throwing up your opinions, what you have learned from books, what somebody else has told you, and so on, then you and I are not related, because this screen is between us. If we are both trying to find out the issues of the problem, which lie in the problem itself, if both of us are eager to go to the bottom of it, find the truth of it, discover what it is, then we are related. Then your mind is both alert and passive, watching to see what is true in this. Understanding comes, surely, when there is the swift pliability of a mind which is passively aware. Then it is capable of reception. Then it is sensitive. A mind is not sensitive when it is crowded with ideas, prejudices, opinions, either for or against. To understand relationship, there must be a passive awareness which does not destroy relationship. On the contrary, it makes relationship much more vital, much more significant. Then there is in that relationship a possibility of real affection. There is a warmth, a sense of nearness, which is not mere sentiment or sensation. If we can so approach or be in that relationship to everything, then our problems will be easily solved. We are empty shells if we do not possess, if we do not fill our life with furniture, with music, with knowledge. When there is a disruption, a breaking away of that, then there is sorrow, because then you suddenly discover yourself as you are, an empty shell without much meaning. To be aware of the whole content of relationship is action, and from that action there is a possibility of true relationship, a possibility of discovering its great depth, its great significance, and of knowing what love is.